Hello, and welcome to the Feet on the Soil podcast, the podcast about the world beneath our feet and how we interact with it. Today, as I record, I'm looking out my bedroom window across to a few trees that line the car park of the local church, and I can just about see the change in colour from green to orange and red. It's officially autumn time, and if I'm honest, I'm delighted. I'm a real autumn person. I love the whole season. I love everything about it. The changing of colour, the fact that I can break out my jumpers again and my nice coats. The rain even is different to summer rain. It's nicer. There's something, the sound is a little bit nicer against my bedroom windows as I sit inside. And even on the days where I am outside, the temperature is just perfect. It's not the intense heat of summer. It's not the bitter cold of winter. It's something beautifully in between. I start the podcast by saying this because this is an episode about appreciating the change in season, about living with the seasons instead of fighting against them. I wouldn't say that I completely align with any true religion, but I do like to make sure that I care for my spiritual side. As a result of this, I've built up a few kind of seasonal rituals that I perform every year, almost subconsciously, to help me to lock in with which season it is and to live in a way that best suits my body. I've also kind of unintentionally tailored these to the Irish pagan celebrations. So as we're going through each season, I'll of course be covering the more kind of modern interpretation of these seasons, but we'll also be talking about the pagan version. Human history has relied on seasons for both the practical reasons of bringing crops or being able to predict various weather patterns, but also as holders of time, which could then be marked with ceremonies. I think we can kind of feel this naturally. You almost know when the season's going to change, when spring is becoming summer, when summer is becoming autumn, when autumn's becoming winter, and so on. You really can feel it. You know that it's coming. There's something deep inside us that realizes that this is happening. I think because of this, we have to align ourselves with this change in season. We can't fight against it. All we're doing is fighting against our own nature. And ever since I've began to embrace the feelings that come along with the change in season, I've noticed that the things I want to accomplish get done quicker and easier, that I feel a little bit more rested and ready to accomplish things when the time comes to really put some work in. And when it really comes down to resting, I can fully allow myself to. And like I said, I do this with the traditional season system of spring, summer, autumn, winter, but also I like to kind of incorporate a little bit of that Irish paganism. So the celebrations of Imbolc, Bealtaine, Lunasa, and Samhain. I'm not going to say that I'm a neo-pagan or that I'm fully aligned with this as a religion. I just like to acknowledge that celebration and do my own little piece for that. In a kind of a non-traditional sense, we're not going to start with spring. We're going to start with autumn. This is obviously because it's on my mind. We're in the transition between summer and autumn at the moment, and even today I was out for a walk and I saw both seasons. You know, we're in a country where it's not uncommon to see all four seasons in a day, but today we went from lashing rain and strong winds to beautiful belting sun and not a breeze around, but we truly are getting into autumn. Autumn may be my favourite time of year and is a time where I begin to reflect on my year so far and to begin the wind down after the really busy season of summer. I do this in a lot of ways, whether this be an increase in time spent with myself, writing or creating or using guided meditations and practices which allow me to further connect with myself. This is something that I find really important, making sure that after the kind of hustle and bustle of summer, the real intensity that comes along with it, that I re-engage with myself, make sure that everything's okay internally and get ready for the kind of the darker months ahead. And then as the plants which thrived all summer begin to return to the earth in preparation for the harsher winter months, I find myself doing the same. Autumn also tends to bring out the forager in me. I love to pick primroses in the spring or the dandelions of summer, but it's really when the fruits and nuts of autumn come out that I find myself at hedgerows with my secateurs or my little foraging knife. And I say this because these are the rituals that naturally come along to me. I find foraging to be a really mindful process where I can kind of let go of whatever's going on and focus on keeping my eyes soft and looking out for a hazelnut or an elderberry bush or rose hips or blackberries or whatever it might be. And then as I kind of scroll along the hedges, I'm tasting and browsing, and I can truly relax. It's also one of these really powerful connection processes that I go through where for a moment I'm right back in time to a forager. I'm making my living off finding things in the hedges and trees. And it's just a really nice experience. Sometimes I'll play it up in my head and pretend I really am like a Neolithic gatherer, but for the most part, I just find it to be both nourishing for my kind of mentality, but also, I mean, this is fruit and nuts that are, as organic as it gets. They're as good as it gets. So for my physical health, it has to be doing some sort of benefit. And then as far as things like the guided meditation and the journaling, of course, this is going to bring a huge amount of benefits. Journaling is something I think I've talked about in the past. It's not something that I do daily, but it's something that I do whenever the urge really strikes me. And usually in autumn, as the days start getting shorter and the nights start getting colder, I find myself inside a bit more, lighting candles and just enjoying the feeling of putting pen to paper and getting thoughts out of my mind. I suppose that also connects with this kind of internal work. Autumn for me is really a time of getting to know myself a bit better and preparing myself for both the coming winter and the coming new year. One thing that's come into my life relatively recently is the practice of reconnecting with some of my sort of ancestral heritage. Whether this be with family members recently lost or with those I never lived alongside. Practices, both physical or mental, have given me a connection with these people and allow me to let go of some of the troubles of the year so far. So if you haven't listened to my episode about running, I go through a story where I was in the Bourne Arena Reservoir out for a run and I felt this immediate sense of connection. I could feel that there was people running alongside me, that these were my ancestors. And as I've probably mentioned a few times before, my family goes back in Glenismole for quite a long time. So it's not unlikely that I had ancestors in that area for hundreds of years. This was obviously people that I don't think I lived alongside, and this was a moment that really, like I said, it let me let go of certain things in the past. I felt a kind of a safety knowing that if these people could do it, so could I. But I've also had more recent losses. My grandmother and grandfather passed about this time last year, and during that time I had a lot of moments in meditation or in thinking where I truly believed that they were communicating with me. I had an incredibly specifically powerful one during a guided meditation done by, I believe, the Pagan School of Ireland. I can't quite remember. It was a YouTube video of a self-guided meditation, or not a self-guided, but a guided meditation done by them. And in it, you kind of took a boat across this body of water to a new island and travelled through this forested path and eventually came to a clearing. And I had a conversation with my recently passed grandmother, and like I've said in the past, you can make what you want of these types of things, but for me this was a real thing, and it allowed me to take a step, a step forward in processing what had happened. And I think autumn it's a time when this makes a lot of sense. We have the modern tradition of Halloween or the ancient tradition of Samhain, where the kind of border between the living and the kind of beyond is thinner than it ever has been. And because of this, it's probably easier to communicate with these people. So that's a process and a ritual that's become a part of my life only in the last 2 years. And it's something that I'm still learning and developing with. So I'm interested in my journey this year. What's going to happen? What's going to come up? And it's something that I'll probably keep personal. I won't update about, but it's something that I recommend trying. Autumn is also, in a physical sense, the season of harvest. The intentions I've set at the start of the year begin to come to fruition, assuming I've put the work in for them, Much like the work put in spring planting seeds brings the harvest in autumn. I've recently had a couple personal successes, some projects in work, and also in my kind of own little business of this feet on the soil thing that I will talk about at the end of this podcast, actually. Some personal successes that have really just come to light in this autumn period. I've put the work in during the spring and summer. I know I have, and the fruits of my labour are beginning to show up. Like I said, autumn also brings with it the festival of Samhain, a marker of the beginning of the darker days. I find that Samhain brings a magic of a different sort into the world. While summer has dancing seeds in the wind and a feeling of growth and the magic of that process, Samhain marks the start of a new but no less beautiful magic. Hills become more foreboding, filled with mystery, and forests gain a new light of the moon through leafless branches. Again, this is a no less beautiful time, but it is different nonetheless. And it brings us to that second season of winter. Winter in the past for me meant nothing more than Christmas. Christmas was always an enormous part of my life. My family are huge Christmas heads. Very specifically, the grandmother I mentioned who recently passed was someone who really embodied Christmas. You would see her coming into whatever house it was that we were celebrating with bags and bags and bags of gifts, and it wasn't to show wealth or affluence. It was because all she wanted to do was give back. And because of this, Christmas was just magic, and it still is to me, but it's a different type of magic. Last winter, for the first time, I began reading a book series by Susan Cooper, known as the Dark is Rising series. It's a collection of books focused largely on this group of children's adventures, and it's heavily based on the folk tales of the British Islands. But it's the second book where I really began to become just engaged with this series. It tells the story of a young boy called Will who learns that he is one of these kind of older ones, these people who have the innate knowledge of landscape and they live beyond time. Because of this, he is able to stay in the same physical location, but travel through its history and see how things were in the past. And I really grabbed onto this for some reason, and as I walked around, I was so focused on imagining what came before. I would be on motorways, but would look to my left and know that a ring fort was once there and imagine the ceremonies and celebrations that took place there. I would look up to hilltops and imagine crowds of people gathering atop them for a burial ceremony. I would walk through the likes of Tala village and see the bustling centre that it once was. And one thing I really learned about winter, both through my own experiences and through reading these books, is that it is important to embrace the darkness. Not in the edgy teenage sense of embracing bad things in the world and listening to emo music, but instead learning that the long nights and bleak weather do not mean you necessarily have to give in to negative feelings, but instead that it can be a time for personal growth. With newfound time, we can release all the negatives of the years gone by and set intentions for the coming brighter days. Like I said, I started looking at the world differently when I was reading these books, and I really began to truly slow down. I began to enjoy the time just spent reading these books and listening to some nice music or enjoying a hot drink, and not having to do these things together, not having to multitask, but simply enjoying each thing as it came. I'm still working towards my goals. I'm still running, going to the gym, reading, improving myself, getting better in all regards, but I'm more lenient on myself. With the rest that I have received in winter, I begin to turn my focus to the new year. Planning begins, and I start to look to who I want to be in the next iteration of myself. This is a time I have come to hugely look forward to and enjoy. With the new year comes a completely new sense of self and the feeling of a clean slate. I've begun to incorporate practices to really bring that home. The new year has become hugely important to me. I will set my list of intentions for the year, and even if I only meet half of them, that means I am 50% better than I was last year. I love this time of feeling like the mistakes of the last year are behind me and I can move on. Of course, every day is a new start, but this has a really different feeling to it. I make sure that I'm leaving the year on a good note, with all ill will left behind. This can be through having difficult conversations with myself, through journaling or meditations or physical activity like running or weightlifting. But I make sure that the me that's coming into the new year is one that is ready to accept the new things that I'm waiting for. And I spend the last days of December putting some real thought into myself and getting ready for the growth that will come in the next season, which is spring. In the Irish pagan tradition, spring is welcomed with the festival of Imbolc. Sheep begin to be accompanied by lambs on the hillside, and the wet ground gains the first speckles of flowers and life. The seeds sown in the previous year have been nourished through the winter, and their efforts are beginning to show. And what is seen in the natural world is reflected in ourselves. We've gotten that kind of starting point of autumn. We've released the seeds that are needed to give growth. In the winter, we have rested in the dark days, and it is spring that we begin to see the first signs of growth. I always remember being in primary school and making St. Bridget's crosses with reeds that our teachers had brought in, and knowing that the weather would soon be good enough to play football in the playground without the need for rain jackets and spare pairs of socks. This was the time when I really began to look forward to getting out with my friends. I knew that I could smell summer on the horizon. And it's the time for spring cleaning, something that when I was a kid I did not look forward to, but now I really, really love. It's time for action to be taken on the intentions set in the seasons before it. I like to take more walks at this time, appreciating the new growth that comes with each passing day as the landscape in front of me begins to change. Every time I visit the local park or nature reserve or national park, whatever it is, I see something new, whether it be the aforementioned primroses, the leaves coming out on the oaks and the birches, the flowers of an apple tree or a cherry blossom. Everything becomes new and brighter and not more beautiful, but more, I suppose colourful is too basic a word, but it describes it perfectly. In the past, spring has also meant for me a beginning of work in the garden, clearing of beds to make way for onions, peas and salad greens, in the hopes of a homegrown dinner later in the year. This year I took a break from vegetable gardening. I knew that it was going to be a busy one, but already, after just 1 year, I can feel that burn back in me. I'm already planning what I'm going to plant out in my raised beds, and I really look forward to the feeling of pulling up potatoes and eating them for my own dinner, knowing that I put in the work for them. And also, I look forward to that specific smell that the air gains as the buds begin to appear on the trees. To be honest, spring would have long been my least favourite of the seasons. It didn't have the romance of autumn and winter, and it didn't have the weather of summer. But as time goes on and I realise that this is the time of pulling back the arrow before its inevitable release in summer, it has become a time I truly look forward to. The kind of rituals that I bring in this time of year are the aforementioned walks. As much as these are kind of basic things, they're not walks for the sake of fitness. They're not walks for a commute. They are walks for the sake of walking. Now that I look back, they're similar to the idea of forest bathing. I try and touch the buds of the leaves coming out. I see the dried seed heads that have somehow survived through winter. I hear the birds beginning to come back and their calls bouncing around the forest. And I try and just enjoy the sounds of spring and allow them to sort of soak over me. I also sort of briefly skimmed over it, but spring cleaning is really something that I've come to appreciate. And this can be a physical thing, of course. My room, as I look around at the moment, is a little bit of a mess and probably needs a bit of a spring clean right now. But what I really mean is kind of dusting off all the edges, getting ready for summer. So if there's anything hanging on from the autumn and winter, trying to fix that, trying to get the body as a physical vessel as ready as possible, whether that be through running, weightlifting, walking, whatever it may be, swimming. Just making sure that we are as prepared as possible for the hustle and bustle that is the final season of summer. Summer starts with Bealtaine. This is the time when the arrow flies. I've always found that of all the seasons, summer passes the fastest. There's a new flower to admire every day, a new bird to hear, and a new insect to examine, and it feels like if you blink, you could miss something fascinating. Summer is the time of abundance and vitality. Things are coming up in the garden by the handful, and one thing that I really want to bring in as a ritual is essentially these summer feasts. I did them a little bit during the time where I was vegetable gardening, where I would make large batches of food and be able to give them out to family. But this year I really want to take that serious. I want to have this feeling of abundance. I want to really embrace this. You know, summer is a time of pure joy. The weather is hot, the days are long, everything is painted in this like nostalgic colour. And this year has been the first summer where I've really embraced swimming as a new practice. Now, as someone with a really big fear of water, I'd say the 2 times I went sea swimming this summer were some pretty big steps and something I am more than willing to continue. After chatting with my good friend Rob, who's been on the podcast before, I was convinced to give sea swimming a try. Living in Dublin, specifically South Dublin, it seems like every second person that you meet claims that sea swimming changed their lives, and I wasn't going to be the last person left whose life hadn't been changed. So before recording the episode with Rob, I got the togs on and we went out into the ocean. And I wouldn't call it a swim as much as I would call it a dunk, but I did put my head under. After a little bit of convincing, I was fully submerged in the icy waters of the Irish Sea. And upon getting out, I was elated. It was fantastic. I don't know what it is. It's just cold, dirty water. Well, it's dirty in Dublin, but I felt great. I was full of energy and I had that feeling of abundance and joy that I really want to embody during the summer. I just felt like the world was mine, and again, the rest and the preparation that I put in through the rest of the year was coming to fruition. I will admit that I do like to put all of my effort into work during the summer. I take on extra stuff at work and I do as much as possible, but I enjoy it. I love it. I'm kind of just thrown into it. I like to put as much focus as possible onto my personal projects, things like this podcast and my TikTok and my Instagram and everything like that, because I just have the energy to do it. I just feel so drawn to it. And like that, summer is when the fruits of labour truly begin to form, whether this is in the literal sense of overflowing vegetable beds or the sense of personal and work projects speeding up as we use the extra daylight to achieve our goals. The rest that we have accumulated in the darker segments of the year are put to the test, and we try to glean every bit of joy from this season of vitality. So these are some of the things that I've kind of embraced. They're practices that work with the way that my life works. They're not going to work for everybody, but I'll end by saying the practices thus far are my own. And while they benefit me and they may benefit your life, it's important to tailor them to yourself. My girlfriend has recently introduced me to the most amazing thing, and that is creating monthly vision boards on Pinterest or whatever you want to use. You could even print off the pictures physically. I think this is a great first step to realizing that, like any creature, we are reactive to the seasonal changes around us, and this can be a positive or a negative. By planning your time around the seasons, I believe that we can also start to take a little bit of that magic back into our lives. I haven't covered fully the different pagan celebrations. I've only mentioned when they are. That's because, to be honest, I'm not really qualified to be able to talk about them. I just know that when they come around, I see them on my Instagram, I do a bit of looking into them, and I just try and be conscious of them. If this is something that particularly appeals to you, you can embrace them more. If the thought of doing sunrise meditations in summer puts you off, you don't have to do them. These are the things that we tailor to our own lives, that we take from others' individual practices and implement them for ourselves. But you don't have to take exactly what I say as gospel. But by making these vision boards, you can begin to put together what your ideal summer is, your ideal autumn, or even take it month by month, your ideal July, your ideal April. And by doing this, you can take these visuals and you can distill them down into individual tasks. I think through doing this, I've begun to sort of slow down and appreciate the time that's going by. And I've started to think about how my body specifically reacts to individual seasons. And this is something you should do as well. This is something that journaling helps a huge amount with, because you can look back and see how your emotions are through different times. But based on that, then you can pick practices that nurture this and then integrate them into your life. You can find romance in the darker months rather than giving in to the kind of sadness that comes with the shorter days. And you can make sure that you make the absolute most out of the brighter days. The days and months can fly by if you're not careful. And in our modern world, you may not even see the changes. Now, more than ever, it's integral to protect your connection to the natural world and nurture it whenever possible. If this simply means journaling a little bit more in the darker months and getting outside a little bit more in the brighter months, I think that's a positive step. I think just realizing that with each month comes something new and beautiful, and not necessarily the loss of something beautiful of the month before, it changes the way you look at the world. It changes your outlook, and it certainly has changed mine. I've began to see that while the winter is darker, while the winter is cold, and sometimes I'm really annoyed that I can't get out for my run because it's lashing rain and the wind is coming in sideways, that's a night to sit down and read. That's a night to do some planning for the new year. It doesn't mean I've lost anything. It means I've gained something. I hope that some of these tips have helped. If you have any kind of seasonal rituals that you have, I'd love to hear them. Again, DMs are always open on all my social medias. But I think it's something that is a huge benefit to my life. I'd love to see people integrate this kind of seasonal thinking. It's a bit related to this sort of slow living movement, which in general I think is just taking more traditional lifestyle techniques and integrating them into a modern world. I don't think you have to move out to a cabin in the woods or a cottage to live that full cottagecore dream. I think that anyone can live it. You just have to know where to go, what to do, and how you react to different things. So just before we finish, I'm going to get to that little announcement that I said about halfway through the episode. And this is something I've been just so excited to announce. I got a DM not long ago from Spun Out, a organization that I was familiar with from some of their work with different content creators that I follow, and a group who are doing really important work. Creating an unbiased platform for young people to receive information is really integral in this time where it's kind of hard to trust what you're hearing. And it was to ask me if I would be a panel speaker in their climate panel at Earth Rising, a festival held in Imma. This was pretty amazing. It's the first time I've been reached out to in regards to this, to feed on the soil. And I just want to say a massive thank you to Spun Out for reaching out to me and for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to be doing a post in the coming few days that will go into a little bit more detail about what exactly this is. But just know that on the 21st of September, you'll be able to come and see me waffle on about conservation in Ireland at Imma. And I really promote you to go to this. It's a fantastic event. I haven't been able to go to it, but I've watched a load of the videos and I've seen some of the art pieces that have come out of it. And I think to kind of collaborate artists with environmentalists is so important. It creates more conversation. It creates a visual to go along with the message that we're so desperately trying to put out there. So again, an enormous thank you to Spun Out, and I truly hope to see a few of you there. So thank you very much for listening, and truly try and get outside today.